Good morning, afternoon, and evening, all. Thank you so much for joining our final webinar of 2020, the 2020 Transportation Electrification Review. We'll be joined by esteemed guest, Jeff Allen, our Executive Director at Fourth. No announcement from me. I'm Simbiat Yusuf, the Member Relations Manager here at Fourth for today. So without further ado, I will let Jeff Allen take it off with 2020 review and looking forward to 2021. Jeff?
Great. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you may be. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to jump right in and let the folks who joined late catch up with us. So we're going to give you a little bit of a review of some of the things we've been watching in this extraordinary past year and how we at Fourth have been working to respond to those, and then look forward to hearing more from you all about what you've been watching and how you've been responding. First, just a reminder to please submit questions through the attendee chat. We are looking forward to a discussion. As always with Fourth events, it's really about the interaction and the conversation. So I'm going to talk for a while, but I'm looking forward to a robust conversation with you all. With that, I'm going to remove myself here and let you focus on the slides for the next few minutes. And just a reminder, hopefully, for most of you, that Fourth's mission is to accelerate the use of smart transportation to move people and goods in a more efficient, cleaner, and equitable way. And this year has certainly been like no other. And as we've been approaching this year, we've been thinking about how do our four main focus areas adapt and evolve in this unprecedented time of change. And again, just a refresher, I suspect for most of you, we do a lot of work being the connective tissue and pulling the industry together, the different stakeholders in the industry. We do a lot of work on public policy and setting the framework for smart mobility solutions. We do a lot of demonstration projects that bring people together to figure out how these new business models are going to work in the real world. And we do direct efforts to accelerate market adoption of these new vehicles and new technologies. And all of these have been challenged in new ways in the coming year, or in the past year, rather. And we do this work in partnership with our members. We now have nearly 200 members here at Fourth. And before we get too far into that discussion about what we see, apologies, Simbi, I already messed up our script here. Let's see who's in the room. I believe we have a poll to help us get a sense of that. Thank you for filling that out. If you just take a moment to fill out the poll, we'd love to see who we have with us here today. And as you're filling that out, we're going to tee up some short videos from a few of our members about how they've been adapting over this past year and what they see coming in the year ahead. Simbi, can we go to those while we are getting the poll results, or whenever you want to close out the poll, you can go to the video.
Hi, Scott Case here, CEO and founder of Recurrent. Recurrent provides battery analytics for buyers of used electric vehicles so they can buy used EVs with transparency and confidence in that purchase. 2020 was a big year for us because, well, we were founded this year. In 2021, what I'm really looking forward to is a step function in the number of used EVs on the scene, and that's driven by the 3-year anniversary of the Tesla Model 3's release new, and we're finally starting to see used EV come in big numbers. People, and with that is, along with that is the mainstream kind of adoption of used EVs. At this point, less than 1% of drivers on the road are EV drivers today, but 70% of people, up to 70%, are considering an EV for their next car, and I think a lot of them are going to be used EVs. So excited for 2021.
I'm William Henderson, CEO at Ride Report. RideReport takes on the administrative burden of working with shared mobility providers like Lyft and Spin so that you can get back to running your city. And I want to tell you about some changes we made in 2020 due to COVID. We saw cities were rushing to adapt their transportation networks, and we recognized that they needed to move quickly and in tighter partnerships with mobility providers. That all comes back to having confidence in the data that they're getting. To help cities get that confidence, we prioritize automated data auditing and compliance. And because of that work and our operating partnerships, RideReport can provide cities with a single socially distanced source of truth for managing shared mobility, including everything from real-time fleet counts to printing monthly invoices. In 2021, we're looking forward to helping cities through a data-driven approach understand how these shared mobility programs can support their core missions and objectives while improving the right of way for all.
2020 has been a challenging year for everyone. But nothing about this year has changed EVBox's core principles or our key strategies. We remain committed to providing best-in-class design, flexible architecture, a focus on open protocols, all at affordable pricing that can bring EV solutions to everyone. When we look forward to 2021, what we're most excited about is the continued and enhanced investment that we see coming in previously underserved areas. A focus on rural communities and disadvantaged communities can bring EV solutions to drivers who may not have thought that they were coming in their areas. And making sure that solutions are available across the heartland will provide EV solutions for the entire continent as drivers go across this country. With these kinds of investments, we're very excited about what the future will bring, and we look forward to a strong 2021.
Great. Thank you so much for our members and for those messages. I'm going to do one more quick poll here before we get into the next remarks. And see how many of the folks who are on the webinar today are already members of Fourth. And you can probably see this one coming. If you are not a member of Fourth, we'd love to talk to you about membership, about the benefits of membership. There's also more information on our website at fourthmobility.org. And we do encourage you to join those 180 or so members that we have today and join us in advancing electric and smart transportation. Thank you so much. Okay, now let's move on to how we've been seeing the world here at Fourth. And obviously, the big story, the elephant in the room, is what's been going on with this global pandemic. And I was really proud, probably as proud as I've ever been, of the team here at Fourth and how we pivoted to respond to COVID in the early days. In our backyard here in Portland, we put our vehicles to work delivering food to those in need, delivering mobile testing and personal protective equipment in partnership with community-based organizations to farm workers and other vulnerable populations. And we pivoted a number of our programs, and obviously our team has been working remotely. I think now, as we can begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel coming a few months away, the question is, what sort of lasting changes and trends are we going to see out of this pandemic? And one of the most striking is going to be changes, I think, in the way that commuters behave. So first of all, we've seen, and I think it'll continue for some time, dramatic drop in transit use. We believe that the trend to telecommuting will be durable and sticky at some level. We've also seen a bit of a shift to walking, biking, micromobility, but also a big shift to private car use, in particular dramatic spikes here in the US in used car prices, and also more mileage and more vehicles doing deliveries and responding to online shopping. And as we've been looking at these trends and how we respond to them, one of the big takeaways for us has been to double down in our work on micromobility, things like electric bikes, scooters, other technologies, making sure that they are more accessible, more available, particularly to historically underserved communities, more affordable, more safe. We had some work already underway improving scooter access and safety. We have also been doing some work around electric bike promotion and financing pilots, actually dating back to our founding nearly 10 years ago. We have some projects in the works that I look forward to rolling out and talking to you more about in 2021. But one recent effort that we're really proud of is our partnership with the Metro Regional Government here in Portland and with our regional bike sharing program, Bike Town. And a video we recently produced, I think just a few days ago, in fact, it went live, that I'd love to share with you now. So I'll confess, part of what I love about that video is it is also proof that the sun does indeed shine here in Portland, Oregon. And it was a great sunny day when we filmed that. So we're also doing a lot more work in promoting access to micromobility in historically underserved neighborhoods and making electric bikes and other kinds of technology more accessible. And that gets to the next trend, which has been the increasing and overdue focus on racial equity in this country. And obviously, that's been a huge focus for the last several months. And this is work that Forth has been doing for several years, but that we've really doubled down on, I would say, in the last 6 months, and rightly so. Those of you unfamiliar, this is a map, a redlining map of Portland, Oregon, again, our hometown. That was produced as part of official U.S. government policy that basically made it extremely difficult for communities of color to purchase homes and pushed people of color into particular neighborhoods. It's part of a long history in the U.S. of transportation investments, transportation policy that have reinforced inequalities. We could do an entire webinar and have done and will continue to do entire events on that topic. But I think part of what's most exciting about this is the fact that increasingly, as we've dug into this work, it has reinforced this notion of targeted universalism. That is, that if we design programs with the most vulnerable populations in mind, they actually result in better programs for everyone. And couple of examples of that that we've been really excited about in the past year or so. We have a number of projects that bring electric mobility to historically underserved communities. One we launched about a year ago in Hood River, Oregon, that's looking at how to do that with a more rural community. One that we just launched this year in St. Louis with U.S. Department of Energy support, looking at bringing electric vehicles to serve elderly folks, getting them to medical appointments and so forth. And Those demonstration projects are really moving us towards a more scalable, sustainable business model for shared electric mobility in historically underserved communities. We've also been working over the last year to stand up a really robust marketing campaign for Oregon's Charge Ahead rebate, which is part of the rebate legislation we passed here in Oregon a few years back, which provides a double rebate for income qualifying electric vehicle buyers and actually a rebate for used electric vehicles for income qualifying buyers. They can get up to $2,500 on a used electric vehicle. And we're very excited about that program as it rolls out, becomes more widely known. And then another project that we launched just in the past few months that we're really excited about is called the Fair Financing Pilot. And this came out of our work promoting the rebate and also our work to electrify Uber and Lyft and help more Uber and Lyft drivers go electric on the platform. And if you go to our website and look at the information for rideshare drivers there, you'll see we have a podcast that we've now launched for folks who are driving for Uber and Lyft and other delivery services, where they can hear from real live drivers who drive electric on the platform. We have a whole wealth of resources there. But one of the things we ran into is even with a $2,500 rebate, even with a used electric car that may only cost $10,000 or $11,000 or $15,000, that's still out of reach for a lot of lower income folks and particularly a lot of ride hailing drivers. And a lot of those folks have trouble qualifying for a conventional car loan at a reasonable rate. So we've launched this Fair Financing Pilot, and we have yet another video to share with you about that.
So one of the biggest barriers to electric vehicle adoption in rideshare that we've seen is the initial financial cost of those vehicles. And the Fair Financing Pilot, simply put, aims to really break down that barrier by offering low interest rate loans to drivers so they can use them for used electric vehicles. Fourth is able to offer these financial options through our partners in this program. We've worked with a number of organizations who have all helped us build this loan loss reserve fund. And what that fund does is that it allows our financial partner, Point West Credit Union, to make loans to drivers that typically would be ineligible for them. So for example, rideshare drivers often have difficulty documenting their full income on loan applications just due to the nature of their work. So a lot of those applications are then turned down. And this fund that we have now allows financial institutions to give out these loans that are at a lower interest rate than would typically be available for a driver applying.
Great. And again, there's more information about that on our website, and please do check that out. Another project we launched just in the last year that we're very excited about as we dig deeper into equity is called the TEEM Community of Practice Towards Equitable Electric Mobility. And this is a partnership with the Greenlining Institute out of California, where we're bringing together a community of environmental and equity advocates at the state level, helping them work together more effectively and build their capacity to advance transportation electrification policy. And we've just recently announced our first cohort, which will include the states of Colorado, Illinois, North Carolina, and Virginia, partnering with California that has the deepest experience in this space to learn together and move forward. So look forward to hearing more from the community of practice in the coming year. One of the other trends, unfortunately continuing trends in this past year, has been that most consumers really continue to be pretty uninformed about electric vehicle options and features. It's been a very small percentage of automaker advertising, a very small percentage of what utilities are putting into transportation electrification programs is around outreach. And surveys show that even in California, most consumers remain unaware of electric vehicles. And perhaps most concerning, this doesn't really seem to be moving very quickly. doesn't seem to be improving very fast. And this is an area where we've been active for a long time. This image is from our physical showroom in downtown Portland that we launched a few years ago as the first such in the United States, where folks can get brand neutral information about electric vehicles. Obviously, we had a robust calendar of ride and drive events and face-to-face outreach planned for 2020, which we had to pivot very quickly to online. We've launched a number of new virtual programs, one called the Evening Commute for an after-work hour, taking advantage of the time folks are mostly not spending commuting. One called EV Cafeteria, which is more focused on the lunch hour. We've done virtual ride and drive events. We've also been working over the last year to really scale up this engagement work and find ways to work with intermediary organizations. So, for example, we've been developing more scalable programs for dealers, and we've just launched a pilot on that program in the Eugene area here in Oregon. Larger scale programs for workplaces and other intermediaries. And again, more on that I'm not quite able to tell you about yet, but stay tuned for 2021. We've also been increasingly doing this engagement and outreach beyond Oregon, beyond the Pacific Northwest. We're very excited this past year to partner with the Colorado Energy Office to help develop a statewide engagement strategy there. And we've been working with a number of cities around the country, as well as part of the Bloomberg Climate Cities Challenge. One of the other trends, again, continuing trends from last year and continuing through 2020 and accelerating going into 2021, has been the increasing focus on medium and heavy duty electrification, and that this is about a lot more than just cars, scooters, and e-bikes, and even more than about personal transport. It's really about electrifying everything that moves. And we've seen major announcements and real fast pivots from incumbent companies like our member here, Daimler Trucks North America. Obviously, a number of startups coming into this space as well, major purchase commitments and announcements from companies like Amazon, and also major policy drivers like the Advanced Clean Truck Rule in California, which is now had several states sign on to a multi-state MOU to advance clean heavy-duty electrification. Now, there's been a lot of focus on transit and school buses and Class 8 trucks and so forth. And we're going to have some announcements about projects in that space in 2021 as well. But in a very Forth-like way, one of our first responses was, how could we use these technologies to improve access, to reach new audiences, historically underserved audiences? And what are the cutting edge challenges that we don't see being tackled by some of the other players in this space, which led us very quickly to agricultural applications, and really thrilled about a project that we've launched in the last few months to bring a handful of electric tractors to Oregon and test them in different use cases, different kinds of agriculture, whether it's tree fruits or row crops or other kinds of crops, and really learn more about what are the barriers, what are the opportunities, how do we accelerate adoption of these kinds of vehicles, and how do we prove that transportation electrification is not just for urban folks and not just for passengers. So we should have some, results, initial results of that work coming in the next few months, next year. And as I mentioned, we will have some projects, more traditional projects with school buses and other heavy-duty vehicles as well. So stay tuned. Again, just a reminder, I see a few questions coming through the attendee chat, which is great, but keep those coming, please. Now, one of the other trends we see, and I apologize, some of you have heard me use this William Gibson quote over and over and over again, that the future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed. But it just seems so apt when we're talking about transportation electrification. And this is one of my favorite maps from our friends at the International Council on Clean Transportation, showing new EV registrations by metropolitan area. And obviously, we're talking about a left coast market, an east coast market, islands in places like Colorado and Salt Lake City. But there's big parts of the country that are in a completely different place when it comes to transportation electrification. So we've always seen one of our roles has been to share the best practices and lessons learned. So how do we learn from the early adopters, avoid repeating those mistakes, leapfrog some of the things that they've done, and how do we quickly disseminate that information across industry stakeholders? And again, this was a very rapid pivot in 2020. I know many of you were probably planning to come to our roadmap conference back in June, which would have been in collaboration with the Global Electric Vehicle Symposium. And we were really sad that we were not able to do that in person. But we have, again, broke records with our virtual roadmap 2020 and those webinar sessions. We also doubled our schedule of webinars like this to 2 per month and have seen huge increases in participation in these webinars. And we were also very, very happy to launch the E-Mobility Equity Conference as a virtual event a few weeks ago. A little bit more about how we're responding and how we continue to bring folks together and disseminate best practices and find common ground. We are planning for Roadmap 2021. The call for speaking proposals has recently closed. I would say if you have great emerging ideas, we always want to hear them. We do want to flag that we have deep discounts on tickets through the end of December during our pre-sale, and that we're also discounting sponsorships through the end of December. And we hope that many of you will be able to participate in Roadmap this year. I mentioned the E-Mobility Equity Conference. Those of you who were not able to attend this first of its kind event, I would say you missed out, but you didn't miss out because we will be sharing the results in the weeks to come. But we had nearly 1,000 registrants for the first time conference. Those of you who know Dr. Robert Bullard, widely regarded as the father of environmental justice, gave the keynote speech, dozens of panels and networking. We will be announcing plans in the next few months for a 2021 event, so stay tuned for that. And we will be making the videos of those sessions available online in the coming months as well. And of course, there are webinars and more webinars. And we're going to keep up this intense schedule of webinars through the first half of the year. I think a lot of us are getting used to this way of interacting and learning from each other and are not going to be traveling for a little while yet. So we are thrilled to have a diverse array of topics and engaging speakers and dialogue coming up in the next few months. And we're really happy that we've been able to continue to keep these events free of charge and to make the recordings available on our website. So even if you're not able to attend the event, you can get that information. That's made possible by our sponsors. So again, if you are interested in sponsoring one or more of these events, please reach out to Symbiot on the call here. And I think, Symbi, you've got a... Whoop, yep, sorry. You've got some information for us about this. Yes, another poll. So I talked about roadmap, I talked about the E-Mobility Equity Conference, and I've talked about our webinars. We'd love to just hear, we're sort of asking you which of our children we love the most, but we'd love to hear which of these events you're most looking forward to in 2021, if you had to pick one. Great. Okay, I think we will keep moving because I see a lot of questions coming in that I want to get to. One of the other major trends, obviously, I'm sure you all noticed we had an election recently, and that's expected to accelerate electric mobility. We expect to see major increases in federal investment and some policy shifts, even presuming that there continues to be a divided government. We think there's a lot of bipartisan consensus around transportation electrification. Some of the changes that we expect to see will include, we're already seeing movement towards stronger national vehicle standards and a reaffirmation of California's ability to set standards. We do expect to see in some form stronger incentives and increased funding for infrastructure and other electric mobility programs. And we are certainly ramping up our presence in federal level. In the past, a lot of our policy work was focused at the state level, but we are increasingly leaning in to provide expertise as the federal government looks at expanding programs in this space. And we feel we have a lot of subject matter expertise and hands-on experience to bring to bear. Another trend we've been seeing is that this field is getting increasingly crowded, increasingly, dare I say, mainstream, and increasingly global. And we expect all of that to continue and accelerate through 2021. Again, I expect anybody who's on this call probably knows that EV startups are extremely hot, and a number of them have been in transactions recently. We're seeing a number of major consulting firms, including a number of our members, expanding and developing their transportation electrification practices. We're also seeing a number of philanthropic foundations increasing their funding in this area. In terms of global, I would argue that Asia and Europe have really pulled ahead of the US over the last few years, both in markets, and we're seeing really rapid increases in the percentage of new vehicles sold that are electric in places like the Netherlands and the UK. And in terms of policy, and again, if you're tracking this, you've seen the UK and Norway and other countries committing to phasing out the sale of gas vehicles altogether, and those timelines getting increasingly short. But I would argue that there's still a long way to go. And one way of thinking about that is when I talk to my NGO colleagues and to philanthropic foundations, if you look at the investments that are going into renewable energy and energy efficiency, which are now less than half of global greenhouse gas emissions, versus the amount of effort that's going into transportation decarbonization, there's still at least an order of magnitude mismatch there. Transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and it's receiving at least an order of magnitude less attention from those organizations. So I think we're going to see a lot more movement. And I think that also argues then for groups to be increasingly clear about their role, their niche, how they're going to participate in this space. And increasingly, it's important to have strong partnerships. And that's certainly how Forth is approaching this. We have always felt like it was one of our strengths is our ability to bring folks together, to share best practices, to find solutions. And increasingly, we're doing that in partnership with groups that have networks, whether it's networks of utility staff, networks of transportation officials, networks of government employees, to really bring that subject matter expertise on transportation electrification to those networks. So you saw in the past year that we launched partnerships with SETS around National Smart Energy Week, providing electric vehicle transportation electrification content there. There's going to be an increasing number of those partnerships that we roll out going into 2021. We've also been partnering, this is maybe not quite as visible, increasingly partnering with consulting firms and some of our members on projects and responding to RFPs that come from, particularly from government agencies, sometimes from companies. So again, I would say, if you're interested in partnering with us on projects, please reach out. You can reach out to Symbiot or to me directly to discuss those opportunities. And then one of the concrete partnerships we're most excited about that we launched over the last year, just in the last few weeks, in fact, is the Global Sustainability Mobility Partnership at gsmp.world. And this is a partnership with a couple of international organizations, including Cenex in the UK and the Netherlands, and a group called Julio in South Africa, that's really intended to help developing countries in particular with their transportation electrification efforts. And again, we see this as a natural extension of our work in the US, and particularly our work to help use transportation electrification and smart transportation as a way to disrupt historic inequities in transportation systems. Now taking that work to the global level and making sure that other countries, again, can learn from best practices, can learn from early mistakes, and can leapfrog some of those mistakes that we've made. And I think with that, we're going to open it up to questions and discussion. And I'm going to let you see my face in addition to this beautiful picture here in the Columbia River Gorge. And Simbi, I'm seeing the questions in the chat. So I'll just start answering the ones that I see there and keep them coming as we go. One of the first questions was about percentage of the population in apartments and what Forth is doing there. Yeah, one of the projects that I did not highlight that were undertook about a year and a half ago now is a partnership with U.S. Department of Energy financing to develop best practices for charging in apartment buildings and condominiums and what's in wonk speak known as multi-unit dwellings or MUDs, because that is a big percentage of the population, not just in cities. I think in Oregon statewide, it's something like 20 or 30% of the population that lives in multi-unit dwellings. And obviously that's much more of a challenge for charging. And you can address some of that with building codes for the housing stock going forward, but that's a very slow solution. You know, a lot of the housing stock is already here. How do you go back and retrofit those apartment buildings? So what we're working with is developing, okay, how do you make that really easy and user-friendly for an apartment building manager or a condominium association, because that transaction cost can be brutal. So there's more information about that on our website under our projects section. And maybe Simbi can drop that link into the chat as well, because I know there was also a question about how to keep up on what's going on in the Hood River project, which we call Cruise. And there's also information about that on our website. And I believe we also have the contact information for our project manager there if you want to get in touch with her directly. There's another question about, let's see, where's it going here? Sorry, more more partnerships with utilities, renewable energy supply. Yeah, I would say we don't see our role necessarily as working on what is the content of the grid. Lots of other people, as I mentioned, who are working on that. And as a result, the grid is getting cleaner every year. But we're definitely working with utilities around how do you encourage charging that optimizes the benefits of on the grid and optimizes the use of renewable energy. And often people jump to time of use pricing and tools like that. But there's actually a lot of much more creative solutions that you can use in addition to or instead of that. One of my personal favorites is gamification systems. But it can be as simple as just letting people know that if they set their car up to charge overnight, that they're going to get more renewable power. And that's easy to do with most vehicles and something that most drivers are happy to do. So there's some very easy and low tech and low cost strategies in addition to those higher tech ones. And then longer term, we're really excited about the prospect of smart charging, managed charging, vehicle to grid. But really, again, how do you make those programs very simple, very user-friendly, or even invisible to the driver themselves? Jumping through some other questions here. Yeah, one question about how do we continue to strengthen our equity efforts as an industry, which is a huge question. As I say, we just devoted 2 days of our e-mobility equity conference to that. But I think one thing I would highlight is the importance of just continuing the uncomfortable conversations, or I should say uncomfortable, for somebody like me as a old white guy, and being willing to sit with that discomfort and look at this not just as something that affects our programming and our projects, but really something that we need to look at how does our organization evolve to be a more authentic partner in this work? What kind of internal changes do we need to make? Fourth, we do have a page on our website that's dedicated to our equity efforts that talks in part about some of the internal things that we've been doing in terms of our DEI statement, tracking our board and staff composition, looking at our hiring practices. What are we doing unintentionally that's creating barriers to inclusion? And all of that work is every bit as important as the work with our programs. Let's see. There's another question about working around fleet electrification and fleet management. Yeah, this has been another exciting trend that didn't make the short list, but is definitely worth watching. Is that we're seeing more and more large fleets commit to electrify and get more interested in rapidly transitioning their fleets to electrification. I think most notably in just the last few days, our friends at Atlas Public Policy put out a great report about electrifying the state of Washington fleet and looking at every vehicle of every kind that the state of Washington has and how can they phase electrification. And we have a number of members that are active in that space. And again, I think we're seeing increasing trend in that direction. I think one of the places Forth can be helpful is helping to share resources. We have, as I say, a number of members that do this work. There are a number of companies moving into this space. For example, I cannot tell you the number of times I've heard somebody talk about developing a total cost of ownership calculator, and I can confidently say the last thing we need is yet another total cost of ownership calculator. And on that point, I also see a question about the ROI of fleet EVs. And I think there's a couple of ways, and how do we talk about C-suite folks about the ROI of fleet EVs? And I think there's a few different ways to approach this, right? One is on a strictly total cost of ownership basis and just looking at the numbers around cost competitiveness. And I think in a lot of use cases, there's a pretty clear and easy case, or at least straightforward case to make that electric vehicles are already more cost competitive on a total cost of ownership basis. I think it's often equally or more compelling, though, to start from a sustainability standpoint and a brand standpoint, and to say, let's look at that. And there's some great efforts, again, by many of our partners. We'll particularly call out the folks at EV100, which is a global partnership, getting major companies to pledge to completely electrify their fleet and transition to zero emissions. And they've done great work in this regard. And it's really a twofer to say, look, we've got countries like the UK and other major players, states like California, committing to phase out the sale of gas vehicles. This should be a pretty easy step for major corporate fleets to make as well. And once you make that commitment, then you can follow up and talk about total cost of ownership, and you can talk about how do you make that transition? What other kinds of steps do you need? One of the early challenges in this space, as many of you know, was if you're a fleet manager and you go out and buy a couple of electric vehicles, that's really inefficient and costly versus starting with the end in mind. And if you say over the next 5 years or over the next 10 years, we're going to transition the entire fleet, then you can begin to plan ahead for charging infrastructure, for other kinds of programming, for other kinds of education for your employees, et cetera. And you can make it much more efficient. Okay, we got a lot of other questions coming in here. More questions about the gamification, particularly. And maybe somebody we need to do a follow-up webinar on smart charging and gamification, or I think we might have done one a while back. But I would give a shout out to at least one of our members, and Cindy, you're gonna have to jump in if I get their name wrong, because I know they changed it. It's now part of Geotab, if I'm not mistaken. But they was formerly known as Fleet Karma, and they've done some great work in this space around things like, again, giving that feedback to drivers. I got it right. Excellent. They won't come after me. But providing that feedback to drivers, and if you're a video game person or you have teenagers in the house, you can imagine how that works. It's things like you unlock achievements around when you charge your vehicle. You provide information back to people that says, hey, you charged overnight last night. That's great. Here's what kind of renewable energy you helped support. I believe, and I'm not the expert on their programs, but I believe they also do things like, if you charge off peak a certain amount of time, you can unlock gift cards, you can be entered into drawings for prizes and things like that. But in a lot of places, time of use pricing is a pretty blunt instrument. And particularly in places like Pacific Northwest, where power prices are pretty low to start with, and the average cost of charging your electric car for a month is $20 or $30. An extra time of use incentive of $2 or $3 a month is not really enough to motivate a lot of behavior change. But if you just tell people, hey, if you charge between midnight and 6 a.m., we'll guarantee that you're going to get green power, that could be a much more powerful incentive and a very low cost incentive. Okay, I'm looking for the next question here, Simbi. Anything like California's clean fuel reward available or coming in Oregon, or I'll say other places as well. So this is part of the Clean Fuels program, which at this point exists in Oregon and California, where they're taking, again, we should do another webinar just on clean fuels. I don't want to get too far down in the weeds. But this is basically where you generate, where there's a decreasing carbon standard for transportation fuel, and you can generate credits in the marketplace by fueling vehicles on electricity or other clean fuels. And in California, they've taken some of those credits from electric vehicle charging and put them into incentives on the vehicles themselves. In Oregon's program, those credits for home charging of electric vehicles currently go to the electric utilities, which use them for a variety of different kinds of programs. They have a lot of flexibility for how they use those. There are some discussions right now around rules that would allow for some supplemental credits to be generated. And there is an active rulemaking at DEQ about how those credits would be generated, who would get them, what they would be used for. So I would encourage you to look at the DEQ Clean Fuels website if you want to see more about what's going on with that issue in Oregon. We are seeing a number of other states exploring development of clean fuels programs, and that's an area where our policy team is very active, trying to help make sure that those programs are designed based on best practices from California and Oregon. There has been some discussion about a federal clean fuels program. I suspect that is not a first-year priority for this administration and this Congress with its current makeup, but that could be something we see in the next few years. See other great questions here. So question about how the auto buying and leasing experience is evolving in the years ahead. That is a great question. We are clearly seeing, one of the futurists I like has referred to the pandemic. I'll give him a shout out. He's called the Bald Futurist. He's based here in Oregon if you want to Google him. But he's been referring to the pandemic as the great accelerator, because it has really accelerated a lot of trends that were already underway. And one of them is this transition towards online buying of everything. And particularly with vehicles, we're seeing a really rapid acceleration of the trend where folks are doing most of their vehicle research online. They're doing most of their shopping online. They would really in many cases, just as soon do the entire transaction online and have the vehicle delivered to them. And increasingly, we're seeing incumbent automakers and dealerships move to support more of that kind of a model. And so that's definitely one of the things that we are building into our engagement work and our work to accelerate electric vehicles is how do we provide more of that electric vehicle information online as part of that process. And again, make it very, very easy for folks to buy an electric vehicle, while doing most of that work online. And that's also a way to get around the challenges that we've seen over the last few years with a lot of folks a lot of would-be electric vehicle buyers, shall we say, being discouraged when they go to the dealership, either having dealership staff who are unfamiliar with the technology or unexcited about selling the technology. So I think it's a dual strategy of how do we help tackle that problem head on and make sure that dealership staff are enthusiastic about promoting the technology, and then also make it easier for folks to purchase a vehicle without relying on that dealership employee necessarily. Let's see. Another great question about our international work. Yeah, and who we're partnering with. I would say we would love to partner with anyone and everyone. We have had some conversations with the United Nations, has some active programs in this space, as to the European Union. And we've had recent calls with both of them. I'm hopeful that we're going to see more engagement in this space from some of the US development agencies in the next few years. I think that's another likely initiative of this administration. But I would say definitely if folks have suggestions for initiatives or folks that we should connect with, we would love to get those. You can shoot those to me directly after the webinar. Let's see, another great question here around federal and state policies and how can they help drive EV adoption in non-ZEV states. This is going to be really interesting to watch. I skipped over a little bit some of the likely federal policies, partially for time and partially because there's a lot of uncertainty, obviously, right now about everything at the federal level, but particularly about where transportation electrification policy is going to go. We have seen over the last year or two a real uptake of states that are moving to adopt the ZEV standard. And again, sorry for the jargon, but probably folks on this call know that California has the ability to set its own standards, and those include right now a requirement for an increasing percentage of vehicles sold to be electric. The number of states that have opted into those standards has been going up in the last year. We expect to see a few more states join that program. I suspect there will be a push to develop a national ZEV program and to see if there's an opportunity to develop a compromise national ZEV program. Remains to be seen if that's going to be possible or not. But I think beyond that kind of mandate, there's a whole lot that the federal government can do. For one thing, it can fix and strengthen the tax credit on electric vehicles. As many of you know, the way that tax credit was designed, Tesla and GM and soon Nissan will no longer qualify for those credits. So there's been a big push to change the program to ensure that all electric vehicles continue to qualify, ideally to take it from being a tax credit to being a cash on the hood rebate, which would make it more available, especially to lower income folks. There's a move to potentially increase that or increase it for income qualifying folks and make some other changes. So there's some incentive things that the feds can do. The feds have also not had much of an investment in charging infrastructure. And while they have funded some demonstration and pilot projects, it's been very limited. So I think there's a lot of things that can be done relatively cheaply by doing some demonstration and pilot projects and some targeted investments and incentives around charging, particularly in those places that are sort of ripe. So either states that are just coming into the ZEV program or states that are already pretty promising markets despite not having a ZEV mandate. Like if you recall that map, Salt Lake City is a pretty robust electric vehicle island. And that's partially because of demonstration work that our partners at Rocky Mountain Power have been doing with federal DOE grants, not because of any kind of a mandate. So I think there's a lot of potential there. And I'm being told that we should unfortunately try and wrap it up and bring this to a close. So I will say we'll be sharing these slides, we'll be sharing the video out. Really appreciate the lively conversation from all of you and look forward to talking with all of you in the year ahead.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for all of your insights to 2020 and what we can expect in 2021. As Jeff mentioned, our winter/spring webinar season will start in January. And before we talk about that, I just want to say thank you to all of the speakers we've had in 2020, all of our sponsors, ABB, Puget Sound Energy, Toyota, the UK Department of Trade, Idaho Power, all of our speakers, and all of you for joining us through several webinars this year and engaging with us through our virtual engagement, virtual webinars. We look forward to what 2021 will bring us. But starting off on Tuesday, January 12th, we will be discussing renewable hydrogen programs with the eWeb, Ballard Power Systems, Tacoma Power, and this is a joint webinar by Forth and our partner and member, Renewable Hydrogen Alliance. We hope that we can see you join us, and we have plenty more webinars to come in 2021. As we said, we will be releasing our January to May calendar shortly. And also, if you have any questions with regards to Roadmap 2021, what's taking place, how you can take advantage of the early bird rates, please feel free to email us or go through our website at forthmobility.org and you can get any information you need there. As Jeff mentioned as well, we will be sending this webinar recap along with the video and the slides. So if you missed anything, be sure to check in on that webinar recap that we'll be sending before the end of the day today. Thank you all again for joining us for the end of the year wrap up. Again, thank you, Jeff, and we hope to see you in 2021. Thank you. Have a great day.